Welcome, my friends, to this week's podcast. It's entitled How to Have More Money, Margin, and Meaning in Your Life. And I totally stole the title of the podcast from Graham Cochrane. He's our guest. He's a TEDx and keynote speaker, a seven-figure entrepreneur, and best-selling author of How to Get Paid for What You Know, and a new book called Rebel, Find Yourself by Not Following the Crowd. He speaks to over 80,000 people, just to give you an idea of who this guy is in the world. He speaks to over 80,000 people each month on his top 0.5% globally ranked podcast, The Graham Cochrane Show, where each week he helps people create more money, more margin, and more meaning in their lives. This guy is the real deal. He's got over 14 years of online coaching and content experience, 700,000, you heard me right, 700,000 YouTube subscribers across his channels. And he's built multiple, not once, but more than once, seven-figure businesses that require less than 5 hours of work per week to run. Graham is a leading voice and coach in the life-giving business movement. I love the name of that movement. Graham, your new book is called Rebel, Find Yourself by Not Following the Crowd. I can't wait to get into it with you and talk about that. Welcome to the show.
Hey, so glad to have myself and you in the same room, man. I feel like I've studied from you from afar, taken your courses. I read your books. I was looking at Permission to Prosper on the shelf. That's the closest one to me. So I love your stuff, man, and it's an honor to actually though be able to chat with you and hang out.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to dig right in and talk about your book because the title appealed to me immediately because I've always felt like a rebel. I don't know if it's always been good for me though. So what does it mean to you to be a rebel?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when people think of the word rebel, I don't know what comes up in their mind. A lot of different things come up. For me, maybe it's like the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars. It might be, the movie Rebel Without a Cause, like a James Dean movie, or someone who just wants to be different or break the law. But what I think of as a rebel, and it's just like you're a good example of a rebel, Ray, is someone who decides to show up fully as themselves, complete with all your talents, your gifts, your personality, authentically as yourself, even if the world pushes back and doesn't want you to be yourself. Because my theory is that we're all different. I don't know if we figured that out by now. We're all a little different. And the world doesn't want you to be different. The world wants you to be like them. And so to be a rebel is to actually have the courage to figure out who you are and then show up fully as who you are.
Do you consider yourself a rebel?
I do. And you know who I have to thank for the language is John Gordon, best-selling author and speaker. John Gordon. He's asked me about my life story, and he basically said, "Hey man, you don't like to do what people tell you to do you?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you're like a rebel. Like, the world says this, you do this. The economy says this, you do that. Your industry does this, and you do that." And I had never put that language on myself in that way, but in that moment, like it gave me language for the way I view my life. So I guess I am a rebel, but it just feels like I'm being me. I feel like I've always been a little different than everybody else around me, but the challenge and the frustration in life, I think, comes, Ray, when you're living out of alignment with the way you're designed. And so a big part of what I'm trying to teach in this book is help people figure out, how are you designed? Like Dan Miller, the late Dan Miller says, like the two most important questions to answer are, who am I and why am I here? And that's what I'm trying to help people do through this book.
Those are indeed the two most important questions. I agree with that. And loved Dan. He was a great friend and a good mentor and coach. A real example for me of how to be a good coach and mentor. So, so glad you brought him up. One of the things I love about your work is how you draw from many sources, but you freely share who the source was. In an industry where people seem to forget where they learned things very quickly, it's refreshing to see somebody giving credit where credit is due. How did you come about? Have you always had that value, or is that something new for you? Or
no, man, I've always been that way. Thank you for pointing that out, by the way. I think you're the first person that ever said that. It's actually sad when you say that. It makes me think, oh, I guess that is rare. To me, there's nothing new under the sun. Solomon said that 3,000 years ago, and I think that's still true today. I just am a product of everyone that I've ever learned from. You're one of those guys, Ray, like when I teach copywriting in some of my courses or share stuff, like some of the stuff I learned from you, I'm constantly pointing people back to your resources because I actually think it's fun to just pull the thread of where did I learn this from? Because then it does two things. One, it actually, I think, gives you more credibility when you quote where you learn from or point to the source, because it shows, oh, you're a student, you're a constant student, or you have coaches, or you pay attention. You're actually not making this stuff up. So I think it actually gives you more credibility, but it's the best way to serve the client or the person or the audience. And we're all in the service business. Otherwise, why are we alive? And so if I can teach in my little corner of the universe, like, hey, how to build a sales page or launch your course, and I'm teaching some copywriting, and say, you know what? One of the best resources I've learned about copywriting is Ray Edwards, and you should read his book, How to Write Copy That Sells. Well, then people are going to have another resource they can go dive into. And now I've given them the gift of another mentor, another coach. And they're like, thank you. Thank you so much for the recommendation or the book recommendation or whatever it is. So I feel like it's another way of serving people, but I don't know. I've never been asked that question, but I never thought it was special. I think it's just what you should do.
So let's get back to your book. One of the things you reference in the title and throughout the book, there's this theme of not following the crowd, but being your unique self and finding yourself. What is that all about? What does being a rebel have to do with that?
Yeah. So my theory is, there's this current of culture, right? So it's like a stream, it's like a river, and we know what it looks like. You get in the stream, it's flowing somewhere. So even if you do nothing, you're going to end up somewhere. And the question is, do you like where the current is going, and are you going to like where you end up? And I think a lot of people are either oblivious to the currents, that it could be their family, it could be their culture in the country they live in, it could be the industry. This is the way the industry that they're in is going, and so they're just kind of floating with it. They could be either oblivious, Ray, or like most of us, I think we're just tired. I think we're busy. And when you're tired and busy, I've got a wife and kids, you've got a family, you've got businesses. Like no matter what season of life you're in, you're tired or busy, it's easy to just abdicate your decision-making to other people because you don't want to have to think for yourself. Well, how should I raise my kids? Or how should I run my business? Or, well, what are they doing? What is she doing? What does that book say? And it goes from learning to just like copying or outsourcing your brain to someone else because we're just tired. And then what happens, we end up looking like everybody else. And I just don't think we're made like everybody else. So what I'm trying to do in this book is help people figure out who they actually are, not who they want to become. I don't think you need to become something you're not. I think you just need to uncover who you actually were designed to be. And most of us haven't done the deep work or haven't felt permission to do it or haven't known where to start. And there's a lot of ways to do this deep work. I'm not the first to do it, but I have a process that I feel is useful and helpful. And all I want to get people to do is to figure out who they are so they can show up fully as themselves, so that there's really three things that happen, Ray. Maybe this has been in your experience. I feel like the three things we're all looking for in life, they're all S's, like a good pastor. You'd appreciate it, like alliteration. Success, however you define that. We don't want to be average or mediocre. Nobody sets out to be mediocre. We want to be successful in whatever we do. We want to have success. We want to have satisfaction, which is not the same as success. You can be successful and not satisfied, right? We want to enjoy what we do or enjoy our life and be like, yeah, this is what I want. Success, satisfaction. And then I think ultimately we want to be of service to other people. I think we want to make an impact. Even the most narcissistic, selfish of us, we want to make an impact. We want to do something that people care about and it helps them. Maybe I'm an optimist, but I believe most of us want to serve. So I think what is the secret to getting success, satisfaction, and service? I think it revolves around 4 words, and I mean this in the best way possible, which is do it your way. Do it your way. I think the only way you're going to be successful, satisfied, and of maximum service to people is for Ray Edwards to be Ray Edwards and do it his way. I call that being a rebel. And the same thing for Graham. Graham Cochrane could be successful doing it someone else's way, but maybe he's not going to be satisfied and maybe he won't have as much service to others as if he were to show up fully as himself. So that's the aim of the book.
Yeah, I love that. What I hear you saying is, and this is maybe me reading into what you're saying, but there's a passage of scripture that says, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I think we're each made in that way, very different from everybody else by our creator. I love you talking and sharing with people to discover who you are That's instead of trying to be like somebody you see on social media, be who you were created to be. So you have a framework that you use to help people walk through this process. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so like I call it the Rebel framework. Just make it a simple acronym. It spells out the word rebel, so it's easy to remember. The first step is the R, which is to resolve, specifically resolve to dream again. So if someone comes to me, Ray, and says, "Hey, I don't know who the heck I am, or I don't know who I am anymore," right? That happens, right? People change. Life hits you in the face. You wake up one day and you're like, "Okay, who am I?" For me, it was when I was 26 years old, and I woke up with a wife and a baby and a mortgage in a new state, a new city, unemployed for the second time in 10 months during the global financial crisis. And we were on food stamps for 18 months. And I'm like, what is going on in my life? I have a college degree. I'm moving backwards. Why am I getting government handouts? What's wrong with me that I've kind of moved backwards in my life and I can't seem to provide? And so I had this giant wake up call of, who am I anymore? Because who I thought I was a musician trying to be a rock star. That was my dream. And I tried to sign a record deal by age 22, by my senior year of college. And the long story short, Ray, is I wasn't getting any deals attached to money. There was no money attached to the deals I was being offered. There were all these development deals with air quotes, like we'll develop you, see how you do, and then maybe we'll throw some money. And I was engaged to my now wife, and I was like, well, she was going to want me to have a job. I'm going to want to have a job, and so I can't keep doing this for free. So I had to give up on that dream, and I kind of lost myself for about 4 or 5 years. So I think we all have this moment where we're like, who am I? Or who am I now? And so the first step is like, well, you got to get back to dreaming. You got to go back to what you used to dream about, what you dream about now. And some people are very uncomfortable with that language. Some people think dreaming is foolish. I think it's actually foundational to who you are. I think the way I think about it, Ray, is that it's not about having all your dreams come true. It's about getting data. I mean, to me, a dream, a desire, a hope, an ambition, whatever you want to, what word you want to use, it's a giant clue as to the way God wired you. That's my theory. So I like to take people through an exercise that I actually learned from our mutual friend Cliff Ravenscraft, the 50 dreams exercise. What are 50 things you dream about doing, being, or having? Right. And so, and I walk people through a version of that in the book. And I remember the first time Cliff made me do this, because I worked with Cliff years ago. And Ray, it took me over a week to come up with 50 things I wanted. I was in a transition period of my life, and it was just so hard. And part of it was because of my background. And if you have a Christian background, you might have a similar experience to me, where I was told not to talk about what I want, implicitly. It wasn't explicit, but it's like, it's all about other people, which is great. Philippians chapter 2, like, look out for other people's interests above your own. And okay, that's great. But I had done that so long that I had suffocated and stuffed what Graham really wanted out of life, that it felt uncomfortable to ask myself, what do I want? And I didn't remember what I wanted anymore. So it was almost like starting over. So it was really hard for me at first. I had a lot of judgments about myself. But it's a great place to start for people, just because you got to know what you dream about, big or small, because it's telling you, it wants to tell you something about who you are. And that's just the first step to figure out a little bit about. It's a 30,000-foot view. It's not the complete picture of who you are, but it's where I like to start with people.
It's work I find most people have not done ever or in a very long time. And so I think it's important work to do, figuring out, who am I? What makes me different? What do I love? What am I passionate about? So what comes after we start dreaming again?
Well, I'll tell you what, one thing that might be helpful for somebody is in this dreaming process, like, especially if you're like, well, I don't know what I think about dreaming. There's a place that I think a lot of people can identify with, at least, and I call it the identity crisis intersection. And I have had multiple of these. I might even be going through one right now. Who knows? I feel like a lot's changing in my business and career. So it's kind of, here we go again. But the way I think about it, Ray, is you have a dream, or you had a dream, maybe as a kid or a teenager. And that dream could be a career dream, could be a relational dream, like I want to get married or I want to have kids. It could be a money dream. I want to have like a second home, or I want to live in this type of place, or I want to be financially independent, whatever it is. You have a dream. Then the dream dies. We've all had a dream die. Like my music dream kind of died at 22. Maybe you have the divorce, that marriage dies. Maybe you lose a child. Like, what do you do then? Like, you're at a very tender spot then this is why a lot of people don't dream or have shut that part off, is because they're like, hey, that was so painful or embarrassing or whatever it is. That place after the dream dies is what I call the identity crisis intersection. It's very tender. And I call it that because when your dream dies, part of your identity dies with it. Our dreams are like attached to who we are. That's why it hurts so much. And that's why it feels so good, depending on which side of the dream you're on. And so, who am I? What do I do? You have two choices the way I see it at this intersection. You can either go one way, which is to conform, to get right back in that current of conformity and put your head back down. That was stupid. I'm not going to get married again. I'm not going to start that business again after the business failure. I'm not going to pursue music again after that died. That was silly. Dreams aren't for me. I'm just going to be like everybody else and not ask much out of life. And that is a path you could take. That's a path I took for 4 years after my music dream died. But you have another choice. You have another path, and that path is to dream again. You can choose to dream again. Maybe it's the same dream you pursue at another time or 100th time. Maybe it's a different version of the dream. Maybe it's a different dream altogether that still lights you up in a way you never thought about. And so I think a lot of people are either at that intersection right now and they have that choice, or they've made the choice to conform. And I'm trying to encourage people to, if you haven't dreamed in a long time, maybe it's time to dream again, because that's where you're going to start to get that first clue to who you are.
So I get why it's so important to dream on a personal level. Why is it important to do that when it comes to our businesses? And how does that fit into the rest of your framework?
Well, yeah, because the dream tells you where you want to go, right? Because then you get to the E in the Rebel framework, the first E, which is to establish the outcomes you want in life. So the beautiful thing about this framework in the book is you can apply it to, I look at life in 6 areas. You can chop it up a bunch of different ways, but in the book, I chop it up in your work, or your business, your money or finances, your time, how you choose to spend your time, relationships, health, and your spirituality. So you could take all of those areas, or you could just say, hey, I'm going to focus on one area like business, and I want to fully show up as who I am in my business. So it starts with a dream. Like, what do you dream about for your business? And how does that dream actually affect the other 5 areas of life? And that's where the E comes in, which is the establishing the outcomes you want. And another framework that's helpful for me, and I stole this from Rich Litvin, because when I heard him explain this, it was the first time vision casting made sense to me. He calls it the best 3 years of your life. And instead of having a 10-year vision, which is like a decade from now, I'm going to be a totally different person. It's hard to be motivated or even see clearly. And a 1-year vision is like so short of a timeline. This is why you run out of steam, because you don't see enough momentum after the initial New Year's resolution momentum wears off. It's hard to get a lot done in a year. You can do a lot, but not as much as probably your whole life. But 3 years, this is what Rich Litvin will say, is 3 years is that sweet spot where if I'm coming to you, Ray, in 3 years from now, and you're like, Graham, how have you been since we've been on that podcast together? And I say, Ray, it's been the best 3 years of my life. And you're like, whoa, that's amazing. Graham, tell me about that. Why is that true? What would I have to say for that to be true, to say it has been the best 3 years of my life? That is a sweet journal prompt, because 3 years from now, I am pretty close to my season of life. I can kind of picture-ish what it's going to look like, enough to have some clarity. But also, you could do a lot of damage in 36 months. I can change my business in 36 months. I can change my marriage in 36 months. I can change my body in 36 months. So you can actually have a lot of life change. And so that's the E. That's if we're dreaming up here at 30,000 foot, put that on the ground. What does it look like specifically for you? Day to day, what does your life look like in 3 years? If it's been the best 3 years, when do you wake up? What do you do each day? Who do you spend your time with? How do you pay the bills? What do you not do? Maybe that's a better question. Where have you seen growth? What do your relationships look like? Where are you financially? And this is where I just let people run wild with just dreaming that out in specifics. And that's the fun part of getting clarity. And so to your question about the business, I think every business owner needs to have a 3-year vision. You should hold it loosely, but at least have some clarity of, this is what I'm trying to build for me. And this is why being a rebel as a business owner is so important, because you could look at the Amy Porterfields of the world, the people you've worked with, and it's like, if I'm trying to copy her business, I'm going to be severely disappointed. Just because she's successful and world-class at what she does doesn't mean I should be building the same business as she builds. She's a different person than me. So I need to create Graham's ideal business and get specific. What does that look like? How many hours do I work? Where do I work? What kind of work do I want to do? How do I market my business? I don't like that form of marketing, so I'm not going to do that. There's a lot of freedom here, and that's what I want people to think about, especially as a business owner.
I love that so much. I started thinking about, well, how would I answer that question myself? And I realized you get into like time travel and reverse prophecy over your life. You're looking back over 3 years, and I'm going to say something like, well, Graham, I stopped eating sugar. I started working out with a trainer here locally. Then I got invited to be on the Joe Rogan show. I hung out with Joe for a while. He gave his life to Jesus. And we moved. We got a place in Arizona, and we got a place in Alaska so we could travel when we wanted to, depending on the season. And this sounds crazy, but I think the bigger you can dream like that, then you begin to figure out, well, how to do that? What led me there? That's beautiful. That's brilliant. I love this.
Yeah. So you dream again. So you do the 50 dreams exercise, which I have in the book. The first E is establishing the outcomes. This is like the 3-year vision. And I walk you through getting it down to almost to the daily vision. But this is where it gets really fun. You're like, okay, I kind of knew like your vision. That was beautiful what you're starting to talk about. That's when I think once you start to put it on paper, people think, oh, I'll take 10 minutes and write this out. But if you start, it becomes addictive because you're writing new neural pathways of what could be possible, especially thinking in past tense. And for some people, it's easier than others. Some people, it's a little bit harder. Like I'm a little slow on this, but it gets fun. We go though from this vision becomes a really great, like you need to have something to shoot for, right? We need a destination on the map. But what I don't do is jump right to how to make that a reality. And maybe you've experienced this, Ray. The next part of the framework is almost the most important part of the entire process, and it's the B in Rebel, which is to break the negative thoughts, habits, and patterns that are holding you back. And I feel like all of us have a lot of deep inner work to do, and there's a process I take people through in this chapter called the inner story audit to sort of like pay attention. I feel like there's two voices in our heads. There's the loud inner story or an inner narrative, the default. You're not good enough. For some people, it's you're not good enough. For some people, it's like you're a failure. Some people, you don't belong in this industry. For some people, it's you're not a great husband. You know, whatever the narrative is, it's loud and it's there. It's going to fail. These are all the things that could go wrong. And that's what we pay attention to. But there is another voice in your head. If you can get quiet enough, as Scripture calls it a still small voice. That's how Elijah experienced it, right? I call him the Holy Spirit. You could call it intuition or a hunch, but I believe that like God speaks to us and he speaks in a whisper, and he won't raise his voice. Very rarely will he raise his voice. Most of the time he's whispering, and we just don't hear it over the loud default story. So what I try to get people to do in this part of the book is to identify there's like old code, like a piece of software that they just keep adding updates. It's really hard to take your software to the next level if it's built on old code. So we almost have to undo the old code and write it from scratch so that you can actually believe different things and think different thoughts, which we do in the next part of the framework, so that you can actually lead to different actions. But if you try to jump into just change your life and make that vision a reality when you haven't done the work of undoing all the junk in your brain, good luck. Like once the momentum's up and you're like, wow, that was a great book, but then the reality hits, your thinking is off, you're never going to get very far.
So true, because the limiting beliefs that I've had from my past served me well in their day most of the time, but their day has come and gone. And so if I try to move forward into this new reality, those beliefs are going to come back to try to protect me, and they're going to put the brakes on while I'm trying to step on the gas. That's a recipe for burnout.
That's good. The brain is not wired for your benefit. It's wired for your safety, right? You said it. It wants to keep you safe.
Yeah. Okay, so what comes next?
So yeah, you do some of this deep work. You're identifying those thoughts in your head. You're getting them on paper, as Tim Ferriss says, trapping them on paper. So you see them and like, wow, do I really say that to myself? Do I think that? And you're challenging some of those thoughts, and you're eliminating the bad, so that there's a little more clarity in your brain, so that you can hear better, so that you go to the second E in the Rebel framework, which is to engage in rebellious new thoughts. So engage. We've broken the negative ones, but now it's time to engage in some I call them rebellious new thoughts, but it's just because they're different than what you've been thinking. They're different than what other people are thinking. And this is where the vision starts to become a reality. Something I learned from Julia Woods. She's a brilliant coach, but she does a lot of couples coaching now, but she's just a brilliant thinker. She calls it, like, I call it the life change formula, but this is how she taught it to me, is you new beliefs, new thoughts, new feelings, new actions. So believe, think, feel, do. If I can change my beliefs, it'll change what rolls up around my head all day long, what I think about. And if I now have new thoughts every day, I'm gonna start to feel different than I did before, because my feelings come from my thoughts. And if I start to feel different, I might take different actions. Because change doesn't happen until you do something different. It's not magic, but it really does begin with the belief system. And I think you do this really brilliantly, Ray, in the copy space. Like, selling is such a sticky subject for people because it feels slimy or it feels scammy. And so we come to people like you because we need to sell. We rarely want to sell. And then a guy like you, with like your pastor framework and which is the way you teach, like you removed like the old way of thinking. You're like, no, selling doesn't have to be like this. What if selling is really about serving people? And you give me a whole new way of believing that selling could be something different. So now if I believe selling is serving and not stealing or taking, well, new beliefs. Now I'm thinking about selling differently. Now I feel a little bit different when I'm on a sales video or sales call. Now I'm going to even do different things. I'm going to get different results, but it really is not a tactical thing you're giving people first. It's like, change the way you think about selling. And Bob Berg did this beautifully with the Go Giver, right?
Yeah.
We get our word sell from the old English word sell on, which means to give. Like, you start to think about those things. You're like, well, wow, I could do this. And so that's the beautiful thing. Change the beliefs, you'll eventually change the actions.
Yes. When you go into that selling conversation with the mindset of serving, like when I'm talking to anybody about one of our programs or working with me one-on-one, I'm not thinking about the money I'm going to get. I'm thinking about, how am I going to help this person?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. For me. I'm becoming an author, like writing a book. I didn't really view myself as an author. I've been on YouTube and I've been a course creator and I've been a blogger and that digital space. And sure, I thought I could physically write a book. Just felt like a really long blog post. I don't know, it's more than that, but it was more of like, do I see myself as an author? Do I believe that Graham Cochrane can be an author and is an author? Is author material, whatever that means. So some of the work I had to do, and this happened in 2020 when a lot of us were rethinking our lives at times, I was sitting around thinking, well, daggone it, like I'm never going to feel like an author until I become one, you know? So I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I finally decided, you know what? I believe I can be an author, but I didn't know anything about how to get a book deal or how to write a book or any of that stuff. But that shift of like, well, I'm going to write a book because I believe I could. What do I do next? I started thinking about author stuff. And so thinking was like, well, who do I know that's written a book? And at the time, the only person I knew, and I didn't know them personally yet, was Michael Hyatt. But I had seen him promote a Get Published course or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I need to get published. Maybe I'll buy his course called Get Published. So that the belief led to a new thought. And I'm paying attention. The reticular activation system's kicking in. I'm noticing things because I'm thinking new thoughts. They're always there. His emails are always coming in. Get published. Yeah, I'll buy that course. And I don't even think I finished the course, but I learned enough to start to get new thoughts and feel new feelings about, yeah, okay, do I want to self-publish or traditionally publish? And then that led me to another thought. Well, I do know an author who's actually a best-selling author, Jordan Rayner. He wrote a book called To Create, and he's written a bunch of other books since and helps entrepreneurs who are Christians find the faith and work balance. I was like, oh, I know him. I could just call him and ask him some advice. And so that led to, well, he's like, yeah, what's your book idea? And do you know how to write a proposal? I'm like, no. And so he helped me shape a proposal. Do you know how to get an agent? Well, no, he helped me get an agent. And long story short, all of a sudden I get a book deal and I've written a book and then now I've got my second book. And it's like, well, how did I get from not believing I could be an author to my second book's coming out? I had to change my belief first. And that began this series of events of new beliefs, new thoughts, new feelings, new actions, and now I'm getting new results. And so that dream went from just like, that would be nice one day, to be like a Ray Edwards and write a book that helps people, to, oh, now I'm writing and producing and publishing and selling real books that help people.
Now you're an author.
Now I'm an author, yes.
That's beautiful. All right. So we got one more letter to go, don't we?
One more. Yep. The fifth and final part of the framework is the L in rebel. And this is the hardest one for me, Ray. It's to let go of outcomes and other people's opinions. So it's ironic. We establish outcomes in the second part, but we ended up letting them go in the end. John Gordon, who he wrote the foreword to this book, and he's been mentoring me off and on this last year and been a good friend and a good resource. He has this great line that I struggle with because I'm not wired this way. He talks about loving the process more than the outcome. And he says, if you love the process, you'll love what the process produces. And so he's like, I know you're an outcome-driven guy, Graham. I know you want the outcome, but you got to learn to love the process. And he always references Pavarotti, the great singer, who says, how come people love you so much and you seem so comfortable on the stage? He's like, well, the difference between me and a lot of other singers is that the singers want the audience to love them. He's like, but I love the audience. I love the audience. And it's like, right? What a great line. And you're like, no wonder you're freaking amazing, because here I am wanting people to like me. Is my book good? Am I a good author? Blah, blah, blah. And then Pavarotti and John Gordon, they're in my head saying, no. Love the process. Enjoy writing a book. Imagine how this is going to help people. And then you'll probably like what ends up happening as a result. And that's so hard for me to do, Ray. So it's really the process. It's like, hey, man, life is a journey, they say. And I hate that phrase because I'm like, I just want to get to the destination. But I'm learning. And they say you write the book you most need to read. I need to read this book over and over again. So I'm writing it for myself and for my kids too, so that they can go through this journey with me. But it's like, if you can get clear on the vision you want in life, so you're like, this is what I want, this is where I'm going. And then at the same time, Ray, let go of the outcomes and let it be messy, because being a rebel is messy. It's not just like you're intentional in these areas of your life and then everything works out great. It's a mess, especially if you're going to go against the grain. That's where the letting go of other people's opinions comes in. Like, people are going to at best, they're going to not understand you. At worst, they're going to criticize you. But at best, they're just going to give you that glazed over look like, what? So you haven't gotten a job yet, Graham? No, I haven't had a job in 15 years. I'm probably unemployable at this point. So you're successful with your business in the music recording space. Why are you teaching business coach? Why are you doing a business coaching thing now? Okay, you've been a business coach. Why are you authoring a personal development book? Shouldn't you stay in the business lane? Like, they don't understand when your desires change or the vision you have. And so you have to be okay with that. I'm a recovering people pleaser. So I've learned to, I both don't care what people think and also care what people think. You know what I mean, Ray? So I'm learning to set up, and this is what I help people do in this chapter of the book, is set up your personal or family values if you haven't already done that, so that you can, at least as a family or as an individual, say, you know what? These are the things that I hold dear, and I will move in these directions even if people disagree with me, because they're important to me. So, for example, for me, one of those is my faith. My faith is really important to me. So when some people say, and I have consultants say, like, hey, you shouldn't talk so much about Jesus in your podcast or on your YouTube channel, I'm like, no, you don't understand. If it weren't for Jesus, I wouldn't have a podcast or a YouTube channel or a business. He's the point of it all. So I know what people come to me for. They come to me to learn how to start a business and have a better life. And I'm not going to shove Jesus down their throat, but how can I talk about my life or my belief system without mentioning the Bible or about my faith? It's so integrated. So I'm okay. I'm going to let that be a huge part of what I do, because it's who I am. And it's having that freedom to fully show up as who you are. Not everyone's going to like it, but that's not the point. The point isn't to be liked by everyone. The point is to show up fully as you are, so that the people you were meant to impact will truly get impacted. That's why I'm attracted to your stuff, Ray. A lot of people teach copywriting, but you show up fully as a man of faith. You show up with a humility about you that I'm like, I could learn copy from a lot of people, but I'd rather learn it from you because I connect with you. And I think that's a good business strategy too.
Powerful. Such good stuff. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say to our viewers, our listeners. You need to get this book. I know they can't get the physical book in their hands just yet, depending on when they're watching this, but it comes out the 1st of September. Is that right?
September 3rd.
There's a really good reason for you to pre-order the book, though. I just pre-ordered it myself because you're giving away something like over $300 worth of bonuses and other materials that go along with the book. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So if you pre-order now as a way of saying thank you for supporting me in the pre-order phase, I want to help you start to get results right now so you don't have to wait till the book comes out. So you'll get about a 60-minute video masterclass I shot with John Gordon, teaching you the concepts of the book in depth. We'll go through a lot of the frameworks and stuff. On top of that, I put together what I call the Rebel Journal, which is a downloadable self-guided exercises. I pulled out the 5 biggest exercises. Again, this book is like a coaching session. So I pulled out the work, put it in this journal format so you can go right to journaling out these things. You can do the 3-year vision. You can do the 50-year exercise. You can do the inner story audit. You can do what I call this goal funnel exercise. You can rate your values. All these things you can start working on today. So those are just 2 of them. I have an entire community where I'm doing some exclusive stuff in the community you get access to. And then one thing that some people really like is accountability. So I have a 30-day Rebel challenge where whenever you can turn it on whenever you're ready, and it's 30 emails. It's like 30 days of me popping in your inbox, teaching you nuggets from the book, principles from the book, and helping coach you along so you can go from 0 to transformation in 30 days, starting to believe different, think different, feel different, and do different. You can pre-order the book wherever books are sold, but go to therebelbook.com and take your receipt there for sure. And that's where you can get all the bonuses.
Therebelbook.com. So we'll put the link in the description underneath the YouTube video and the podcast. And I don't think this is the last time you're going to hear me talking about Graham, because I feel like now we're friends, we're connected. I'm going to keep it that way. What's the next thing for Graham Cochrane? What's your next thing?
That's the big question, man. If you're a person that believes God speaks, and I am one, he hasn't told me much after this book. He's told me launch Rebel, put it out there in the world, and we'll talk later. So I'm just focusing on one thing at a time. And honestly, I feel like, Ray, this is a book that I might have mentioned this, but this is a book that I thought maybe I would write 10 years from now. And I felt he said, no, now you got to write it now. Now's the time I want you to write it. So I feel like it's a opportunity to steward a message he's given me that I believe in, a message I think I've been living for the last 20 years without realizing it. So I'm just on the ride, want to help a ton of people, and we'll see what the response is, and we'll go from there.
All right. Go to therebelbook.com, pre-order today. Graham, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ray.